Thank you all for coming to this event. So I'm going to skip the introduction of Kevin and Ovo, and you all saw the book. It's 600 pages long, but don't be intimidated by it. 200 pages of them are footnotes and bibliographies. So it's only 400 pages long. And Kevin, I have to say, I can't imagine you spending years of time reading and analyzing and writing about what Xi Jinping says and thinks. Besides the reason you had to finish a doctoral dissertation at Oxford, why did you pick this subject, and what do you think? Why do you think it's important?
Firstly, it's great to be back home at the Asia Society. So all of my friends and colleagues here from New York and the Society, it's good to be home. And thank you, Li Yuan, for being with us, and Orville as well, who's been a partner in crime with myself for quite a long period of time now. So why do it? I suppose, having grown up as a Roman Catholic, you have an early taste for self-flagellation. So that was a joke for any sort of serious Catholics in the audience, but I did grow up as a Roman Catholic. But I think it's along these lines that if you're a serious student of the Chinese Communist Party, which I've sought to be for most of my life, since I was a junior woodchuck at the Australian National University way back when, ideology has always been a subject which has loomed large in the party's internal discourse. And there's often been a temptation over the years, particularly in the post-Mao period, to reach an informal conclusion that, the Chinese are not serious about that, that it's just part of a gloss, that it's part of a chapeau, that the real politics and the real policy exists in an entirely different and pragmatic domain. And by the way, all my comments are those as a private scholar, not as an Australian ambassador to the United States. If they were in the latter, then I'd become very boring very quickly, what I was saying here today. So grant me that dispensation for the purposes of our conversation. So whereas my view is the more you read, and the more you read the Mao period, for example, and the scholars who spent a lot of time getting inside the head of the pre-49 Communist Party and the post-49 Communist Party, ideology has always mattered. It has mattered in terms of providing a worldview to organise an analysis of where China is in the world, and frankly, what to do with China in the world. Secondly, it's also a methodology through dialectical materialism and historical materialism for viewing reality. And I've reached a conclusion, having read a lot of this stuff, that if the Chinese system and the Chinese Communist Party, and particularly Xi Jinping's party, spends so much time on this, then that is not for no reason. It is because it's regarded as important internally. And if they regard it as important internally, then those of us in the analytical community should treat it with parallel levels of respect. And so the concluding reason in terms of why I would set out to do this is we've spent the last decade or so seeking to understand how Xi Jinping has changed China and changed China domestically and in its policy towards the world. The why question, which is why has he done that and what is his overall driving ideological framework for doing so, is something that has been less explored, which is why I thought it was a useful thing to do, which is why I read the Xi Jinping canon and produced 190 pages of footnotes and bibliography. And I'm sorry about all that. That's not mandatory part of the reading.
Yeah. Although you've been visiting China since 1974, if I'm not wrong, and I'm sure you've heard something that Kevin just refer to, some Chinese would say the Chinese Communist Party doesn't really have a real ideology. It only serves lip service to communism and Marxism, and its ultimate goal is to stay in power. How do you usually respond to those kind of comments?
Well, I think that wager is exactly what Kevin is trying to plumb in his book. Kevin, you spoke of being a Catholic, and I have to say, when your book landed on my desk, you noted, I think, in one of the early chapters that Thomas Aquinas wrote the Summa Theologica, which is several thousand pages long, about everything that could be known in the 13th century about man's relation to God. I don't want to equate Xi Jinping with God, but I did have a kind of a feeling that this was an equivalent, and I think you would share that sentiment. So here's the question that occurs to me.
The Catholic Church would disagree with you.
Well, I'm sure, and I'm sure the Communist Party would too. So if ideology is important for Xi, I'm wondering how you think he got inoculated with that. Now, when he was a young man and got sent away for 7 years to be an educated youth in a very poor part of China, maybe this was the currency of the realm. Those were his formative years. But I wonder how you look back on those early years in terms of how he has become a sort of ideologue after a period when ideology didn't matter that much in China.
The book deliberately sets out not to be a biography of Xi Jinping, in part because others have done this, but in part because I'm not a psychologist, and I find it very difficult to plumb the depths of a man's or a woman's soul in terms of who they are or why they act in a particular way. Mine's a more modest ambition. If you like, it's more of an intellectual biography. It's an ideological biography, which is how has he changed China's known ideological settings as of when he became leader in 2012 to what they are today, and the extent to which those ideological shifts have become barometers or indicators, or in some cases precursors, of real policy and behavioural change in the real world. So to go to your question, therefore, of why ideology in Xi's case, and given the caveat, which is I can't answer, questions about his personal background effectively. But my conclusion from his writings is as follows. Xi Jinping has been deeply traumatized by the collapse of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. Deeply traumatized by it. It is so redolent in his writings and his reflections and his speech-making over a long period of time that as he observes what happens with the Bolshevik Revolution in 2017, his observations that where was the Red Army, where was ideology in the critical events of 1991 when the Soviet Union collapsed, that his equation in his own mind is in the absence of a strong and continuing powerful Leninist state with a coherent set of ideological belief, and he uses the term belief and faith, Xinyang, in a semi-religious way, and the need to be rebaptized, his term, not mine, in that faith, that for him ideology is in part the answer, together with the disciplines of a Leninist party, to hold the country together and to prevent what he sees as the implosion of the then Soviet Union and the dismemberment of what was then the Soviet Union to a multiplicity of states. So I think what I can deduce from his writings is that this has been a galvanizing experience factor in his mind, and it has driven him over a long period of time during the 90s towards this clear statement of ideology. If you go to his pre-2012 writings, when he's been provincial secretary, either in party secretary in either Fujian or in Zhejiang or in Shanghai, there is a reasonable continuity in terms of his views on the centrality of Marxism-Leninism. And I think the last thing that I'd just say on the evidentiary front when people say, well, maybe you're just getting this wrong, Kevin. You are overstating the reality of the significance of ideology. Here is Mao's oeuvre on ideology, on Marxism and Leninism. Here is Deng's, here is Jiang's, here is Hu Jintao's, and here is Xi Jinping's. There is a quantitative factor here. So I always bring myself back to the empirical question, why? They do not do this stuff for fun. It's for a purpose. And I think the purpose that I can best deduce is this level of anxiety that's come out of the CPSU collapse. Plus, we should not underestimate the fact that he is seriously Hongerdai. He's second generation Red. And therefore, if you're part of the party's ancestral tradition from the founders or those who worked with the founders, as the case with his father, Xi Zhongxun, despite the fact that Xi Zhongxun went through multiple traumas during the Cultural Revolution and before, this quest to retain the centrality of the Leninist party has an additional personal dimension and familial dimension as well.
偷偷告诉大家，我最近发现了新法宝 Royal Face 逆时奇迹系列，它有活肤露、全效精华，还有精华霜。尤其我皮肤比较偏干，所以我非常的注重保湿。保湿做得好，肌肤自然烹饪。提亮肤色更年轻，抚平皱纹超有感，而且气色变好。用心保养，每天都更美一点。美吧。